Norm Francis, thank you for joining me for Leadership in a Crisis, the special series that we have put together to look at a wide variety of different strategies that businesses can employ to work their way through what are, without doubt, challenging times. In the course of your history, you've been, in the startup phase of many, many high-tech firms in Vancouver. You're considered to be one of the, the leaders and early leaders in the development of new stage companies that are constantly going through the challenges that I think that so many organizations now are presented with. The landscape is changing on a daily basis. How do I deal with it? Are you and I know that you consult with a number of different companies now, when you're speaking to startups or early stage companies or even some of the more established companies that have not gone through this in the past, what are you telling them about how they need to adjust their thinking and maybe their processes to address the challenges that the COVID pandemic is presenting?
Yeah, well, I think that, first of all, I think one of the advantages of having spent most of my career in the technology industry is the technology industry, because technology is changing all the time. By definition, you're almost being put out of business, every few years because no technology. So most people from the technology industry are kind of used to this sort of constant disruption. Now, we are in a particularly totally unusual time right now of chaos and disruption. And the first thing, and right now, I think a lot of business leaders and entrepreneurs are they're still a bit like the deer in the headlights. They're just kind of, what's the implication? Right now, the first thing I tell them is I think you have to really focus on the resiliency and the survival of your organization, first and foremost. And that can mean several different things. Obviously, every industry's kind of different. But I think most people have taken care of thinking about their employees and health, and we're all working at home, et cetera. But I do think the first thing is to really think about retaining the resiliency of the organization. So that's about survival. Because I think this scenario that we're in, it's going to be longer and deeper than many people think. So that's kind of the first thing. Business leaders, business owners, small, medium-sized, large, by definition, entrepreneurs are sort of optimistic people. And they sort of always are looking on the positive side of things. However, I think right now is kind of a time I tell them, think about the worst that you think is facing you, and then make it even a worse story. Because the key thing is survival right now, is to have a survival plan.
You touched on the fact that your most important resource is your team, the intelligence within that organization. I remember you telling me a number of years ago when you were in the development of one of your companies that you had raised money, you were moving forward. It looked like you were developing a product that was going to find a market. And then you realized that marketplace wasn't going to be there. You were potentially going to run out of money, and then what? But you said that the most important resource that you had was your team. And so you gathered them together and you pivoted. What is that process like when you have to make that decision to say, okay, we're shifting the core of our business?
Well, it's really, really hard because most businesses being founded by sort of that entrepreneurial spirit, they have a vision and it's a dream to whether it's, a new type of restaurant or whether it's a technology company or whatever it is, there's a dream there. And people don't want to give up on their dream because they don't want to admit failure. And so I always say, failure's not bad. And in fact, if you haven't had a couple of failures, you're probably not trying hard enough or taking enough risk. So I try to, when I'm talking with especially younger entrepreneurs, is don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid to admit, hey, this isn't working. And don't be afraid to make the decisive actions that are necessary, given the landscape, the business landscape. Currently, we have both a societal, a health landscape that's a problematic, and you have to be a realist about and be a realist and take decisive action.
Yeah.
Now, the team, back to the team, what one wants to do, I think, in the current time is probably for most businesses, the reality is you can't keep the whole team. And many companies, especially modern companies, they think of themselves as a family, and it's really, really hard, especially for entrepreneurs who haven't been through this. These people, they've worked with them, they've hired them. And the reality is, unless you're in a unique situation, and there are growth businesses happening as we speak, for many businesses, to be resilient, for the business to survive, the core of the business, they won't be able to keep the whole team. And so it is a time, a particularly unique time, to really focus on what it is you are going to do, if you're going to do a part pivot or a change of direction, which is probably necessary. There's not too many businesses out there that over the next few years, I think, are going to be able to keep doing things the same old way. And so I think the idea of a full pivot or a part pivot is to really focus on what does that look like, and what are the key members of your team that you would need to be able to do that, assuming you can survive sort of through all of this.
So there'll be people who will go, okay, Norm, that's a great idea that I should part pivot or pivot. I've not done that before. You have. Based on your experience when you pivoted to create Pivotal, what were some of the steps that you went through that allowed you or helped you to identify what that next opportunity was? Because it's not where you were, yet you looked at the resources that you had and you said, here's what we can do. But getting to that is a series of decisions. Was there a bit of a process that you can now look back and say, yeah, these are the things that we did that allowed us to identify the right opportunity for this team?
Yeah, really good question. I think, so especially putting it into today's context, I think the first thing is to look at try to project what the landscape, what the new normal is going to be, if I can sort of use that phrase. And that phrase is being used a lot. Yeah. And there's a lot of fog out there. There's a storm in front of us. It's very murky. But I think the key is to assume that there's going to be profound change, and to try to look forward and say, what's the landscape going to be like going forward? With regard to business, I think it's a process of going through and saying, once you sort of have your own idea of what that new normal is going to look like, what is going to be needed? And I'm talking about in a business context. What are people going to need, both personally, to live maybe in their homes for months and in this kind of new landscape? What are they going to need, both individuals, and what are businesses going to need? Because life is going to go on. It's going to be different. So it's to try to identify within what you view as the world, what it's going to look like going forward, what is going to be needed. What will people buy? What are their problems going to be? And what solution within your realm of your team's knowledge might you provide? And there's many, like right now, it's absolutely just amazing, just in the last month, that what we're seeing of, these innovative solutions coming up where, wineries and breweries are making hand sanitizer. This is a really good example of sort of saying, okay, what's needed right now? What do we have expertise in a team in, and how can we quickly pivot to take the alcohol that we'd be putting in booze and we're going to make hand sanitizer? Really, really. So I think that's the key process, is to really think over the next few years, what's going to be required and what can we make to solve those problems, whatever's within our team's area of expertise.
When you were talking earlier about how it's difficult to make that change because you have a vision that you've been working towards, and it's not just you as the business leader, but your team is also bought into that. How important is it that if you identify that next opportunity, one, that your team be part of that identification process, and that collectively you work together to define what that opportunity is so that you're all now buying into the new dream?
Well, I guess I'm a little bit old fashioned because I often think the best ideas come from one individual. Now, it may be an individual on your team, but usually the entrepreneurial CEO is the entrepreneurial CEO for a reason, in that they tend to be more creative and more innovative and more sort of risk taking. Not to say that other team members, they definitely do need to be bought in, and communicating the new direction is absolutely key, because we're really saying we're gonna do a course correction here. We're gonna do it quickly, and you're either with the course correction or you're not. And that is, and the challenge right now, and I hear it throughout the businesses that I've been kind of giving advice to recently, is there are, especially the younger generation, they've primarily lived in good times. They've traveled to Europe, in high school. They've gone on exchanges. They've had good education, etc. And they've never really seen, what I'll call bad times. And so there's a lot of denial out there. And any time a business, whether it's in the current condition or, later when, you might have competitors coming at you, a lot of people are procrastinate, and they're in denial. And I do see a lot of denial out there. And it is the responsibility of the business leaders to really communicate strongly and be very definitive that this is the direction that has been decided, which hopefully the team's been involved in, and we all need to be. Now, I think there's a really important point here too, because I don't think business planning, from today forward for at least the next few years, can be the same as it was, where people did annual business plans and they talked about, they do quarterly financial statements, that kind of thing. I throw all that out the window. Whatever the new plan is and the new pivot, if a business is going to change, they have to be extremely agile, and they have to think by the day, by the week. And I've been using the analogy. It's like we're in this snowstorm, and we're trying to go from, we have a vision of what the pivot's going to be, and that's we're at point A and we want to go to point B. That's a new vision. But in between there's this big snowstorm going on, and it's foggy, and along the way we should take small steps, what we can see in front of us, small victories. That's this week. That's going the next half a kilometer, so to speak, in the snowstorm. We may come across a road that's just impassable, and we're going to have to take a side road. And so I think it's so key that the communication by the business leaders to the team is one of adaptability and agility. And the business leaders, the management, may have to come back to the employees and say, well, remember what I said last week? It's just changed because we're seeing the recession's deeper. We can't sell that product, whatever it might be, and we have to change direction.
How important is hard work in this equation? And I mean really hard work. There has to be a commitment to working beyond what you thought was possible. Or do I not?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is a time to get scrappy. Everyone, there can be no attitude on a team of, well, my job is X. I don't sharpen pencils, so to speak, kind of thing. Everyone has to be bought in that they will do what it takes. And particularly today, with so many people working at home, and this either full or partial working at home is going to be a way of life, I think, for quite a while here. So it's really, really key that the family unit, I'll call it that way, which is spouses, children, be bought into this and understand what's going on, because mom or dad, may have to be working at, 5 a.m, in the back bedroom office. kind of idea. And so, yeah, absolutely. This is a time where, I think everyone in business is going to have to sacrifice, dig deep, and kind of, I can just characterize it as kind of do what it takes.
One of the interesting things as you're talking is I'm reminded of the fact that when you go into an office or a place of work, there's different sort of hierarchy of management and authority that tell you this is what you have to do, this is when you have to do it, this is the process, these are the expectations that you have. Well, all of a sudden you're at home. You don't have that same kind of oversight, and you may, as an individual, not be used to having to be that self-disciplined. And I think that this is going to be a really interesting time for people as they find that routine that allows them to remain absolutely focused on the work that they have to do and bring a professional rigor to their work.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's when you're kind of hanging around home for the whole day, it is because you're used to a different routine. I think everyone is learning how to do that and how to structure that. And I don't claim to be an expert on it, but I am hearing, people doing techniques where they actually they write down a routine. They kind of have it in their calendar. They have the break time where they, take the kids, and do the online learning for a couple of hours. And it's kind of the new way of, it's a 24-hour-a-day job, sort of being the parent, the wife, the husband, the work, and to try to fit that in. And I think particularly challenging, there isn't the social interaction, the person to person, except within your own family unit, especially right now, with total, almost total lockdown. So yeah, we're going to have to live with that. And I actually believe that the office, if I can use the phrase, the office as we knew it, which is most people go to work, sort of had a different routine. I think the office as we knew it is is going to change for at least many years, maybe somewhat permanently. And I think that even when people are able to go back to the office in some limited fashion, I think we're going to see companies have to operate in a semi-virtual fashion where some people, just because of spacing and many other issues, possible health issues, if somebody has contracted, coronavirus, whatever, I think we're going to see these hybrid work methodologies. And there are many companies working actually as we speak on technology. I think we're going to see even office design change. I think we're going to see home design change where,
Yeah.
having a little cubicle underneath the stairs or something, because half of your week you're going to be working from home, then you get to go into the office. Kind of, I think these are rapidly developing methodologies. I think they are going to happen, though.
Well, I think you're right. And, as you were saying that, I remember back in the 1970s, there was this projection that long before now, people wouldn't need to go to the office. They'd be working from home. And I thought, what a ridiculous idea. Well, it's being forced upon us now. Thankfully, we have the technology to be able to do that.
Well, we do. And actually, having been involved mainly in the technology industry was kind of probably the leader in this. And that most technology companies already had very elaborate, video conferencing kind of solutions and had Zoom, and people were kind of used to doing this. So they've actually probably been one of the easiest to adapt to this current reality. I think other more traditional industries like government, they just don't have the bandwidth,
Right.
for people to be sitting at home and dial in. Like, I think the government's in semi-chaos because and traditional industries, like I think I hear like the banking industry, because of security and everything like this, the banking industry has a long ways to go to transition to this kind of way of working.
Mm-hmm.
Another important point I'd like to sort of bring up about this kind of working from home, because I think there's two important issues. The most important is mental health. And it is being talked about it's a real looming issue. The isolation, the lack of social in the office, the trauma. There are going to be many more people lose their jobs. There are going to be people whose debts are too high. They're not going to make rent. We're really just in the early stages of this, I think. And the trauma, the personal trauma, the family trauma, the mental health issues that are going to come and are coming, the anxiety as a result of this are a significant issue. And I think any company that is going through this, the leaders need to be thinking about that mental health support for employees, because it is happening and it's going to get deeper. As the trouble in the problems, whether they be health problems, can't visit, aged parents who are in care homes. There's the weight of anxiety is going to be extreme here. And I think it's one of the areas where there's actually a lot of opportunity for innovative solutions, whether it be online counseling, whether it be, the sort of virtual parties, the sort of the best you can do as far as socializing, and techniques to just hold oneself together, I think.
Well, to come full circle back to where we started about pivot, partial pivot or full pivot, I think that whatever you pivot to right now, it may not be where you're going to end up. You have to remain vigilant and be prepared to pivot again and again, because it comes back to your central point. It's about survivability. Right.
And the uncertainty, I think we just all need to acknowledge that the uncertainty is going to be there, and we need to learn to live with it. I think another actually important point for business, which people haven't, everybody's just sort of focused on survival right now and going forward. The other thing I think we're going to face for several years, businesses are going to face, is governments have really had to take control. We know that, primarily. So government emergency regulations have been enacted for rightly so to try to save lives right now, and all those things we know are going on with the hospitals and in the healthcare system. But this is going to probably necessitate, there's been government loans being shoveled out in the early stages. There's going to be but there's going to be, I think, a new government regulatory regime necessitated by this. And I don't think that businesses in many industries are going to be able to, even if it was to kind of clear up, in the relative near term. I think there's going to be a lot of government rules and regulations, particularly around what employees can come into the office, who needs to have what health certificate, what kind of processes you need. The governments probably are going to dictate what your office layout, the spacing. Certainly in restaurants, if you're going to think of reopening a restaurant, I think it's almost for certain there's going to be a new regulation layered on, which is where you put the tables. And I think this is going to apply. So I think, and who knows what that's going to be. And I think we're going to have to learn within the constant pivoting how we business, and I'm talking about businesses here, how we deal with the looming new government regulations.
Great point. Norm Francis, thanks for joining me on this episode of Leadership in a Crisis. Lots to think about, and we'll maybe touch base with you in a couple of months and see where things have shifted and how we might be needing to continue to readjust our thinking. Thanks a lot.
Happy to do it. Hopefully it helps.